children are kidnapped from their families, forced to convert, trained into emotionless killing machines, and then they became the most fearsome military force in the world for 200 years. Listen to this number. At the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, 12,000 Janissaries crushed 25,000 Hungarian troops, including 10,000 heavily armored knights considered the elite of Europe, in just 2 hours. The Hungarian king died, the country lost its independence, and Europe was left stunned by the question, how could slaves defeat nobility? This isn't a story about warriors born with talent. This is a story about how a brutal system could turn nameless children into unstoppable warriors. And when they became too powerful, the very empire that created them had to use cannons to destroy them. If you want to see more paradoxical history stories like this, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Now let's go back to the 14th century, when the Ottoman Empire began the strangest social experiment in history. Every few years, Ottoman officials would appear in Christian villages throughout the Balkans, Greece, and Armenia. They didn't come to collect taxes in gold, silver, or grain, but to collect something far more valuable, people. This was called devşirme, or blood tax, one of the most brutal and bizarre policies in military history. These officials would go from house to house, examining every boy aged 8 to 12, selecting the healthiest, smartest, and those with the most combat potential. Then they took these children away, regardless of the desperate cries of their parents. Imagine that scene, a mother clutching her 10-year-old son, begging Ottoman officials to let him stay. The father is trying to intervene but is being pushed away by guards, and the child crying while looking back at the village growing distant, knowing he would never return to this place again. But why did the Ottomans do this cruel thing? Why didn't they simply recruit soldiers from their own Turkish population? The answer lies in a cold but militarily brilliant logic. Sultan Murad I, who founded the Janissary system in the 14th century, recognized a fundamental problem with every medieval army. Loyalty was always divided. A Turkish nobleman had family, land, his own tribe, and most importantly, independent power. When the Sultan gave orders, they could obey or not, depending on their clan's interests. Islamic history is full of stories about generals rebelling, overthrowing sultans, or simply abandoning battles halfway through when they saw no benefit. But a child taken from a Christian village, completely severed from his homeland, with no family to protect, no property to worry about, and no tribe to be loyal to, that child had only one choice: serve the Sultan with complete devotion, because only the Sultan could give him a life, status, and a reason to exist. Therefore, these boys were brought to Istanbul, where a brutal process of transformation began. They were forced to convert to Islam, learn Turkish, and forget everything about their past. Old names were erased, memories of parents were forbidden to mention, and even their native language was prohibited. They were given new Turkish names, and from now on, they were only Janissaries, meaning new army. But ideological conversion was just the first step. What truly turned these children into unbeatable warriors was the harsh training process that no European army had. From age 12 until 25, Janissary boys lived in military barracks and did nothing but train. 13 years, no vacations, no family, no goal other than becoming the perfect warrior. They woke up at 4 a.m., ran 10 kilometers with full equipment, then practiced swordsmanship for 3 hours straight until their arms trembled so much they could barely hold weapons. After that came archery training, a skill the Ottomans inherited from nomadic Turks, and they had to shoot accurately from 100 meters while standing, kneeling, lying down, and even while running. But what made the Janissaries different wasn't individual skill, but the ability to fight as a unit. While European knights were trained to fight alone, each one a separate hero seeking personal glory, Janissaries were taught that the individual meant nothing. Only the unit mattered. They practiced formations for hours every day, learning to move as a unified block, learning to stand firm when attacked by cavalry, and learning to fire muskets in layers to create a continuous wall of bullets. That's right, muskets, a technology the Ottomans adopted decades earlier than most European nations. In the 15th century, while European knights still relied on heavy armor and long lances, Janissaries were already equipped with arquebuses and later muskets, primitive guns, but powerful enough to pierce steel armor from 50 meters away. They were trained to shoot in three-row formation, the first row kneeling and firing, the second row standing and firing, while the first row reloaded, and the third row ready to replace when needed. This was a tactic that Europe wouldn't learn for another 100 years. But all these skills would be useless without what the Janissaries were forged with every day: absolute discipline. Janissaries were not allowed to marry during service. They were not allowed to own private property. They were not allowed to do business or any work other than fighting. Their life was the barracks, the battlefield, and nothing else. But in return, they were paid well and regularly, a rarity in medieval times when most mercenaries were only paid after victory. They were well fed, received the best possible medical care, and most importantly, they were respected. While commoners had to bow when meeting nobles, nobles had to bow when meeting Janissaries. They became a special class in Ottoman society called kapakulu, or slaves of the state, but this was a type of slave with more power than most free people. Some exceptional Janissaries could even rise to the position of Grand Vizier, commanding the entire Ottoman army, a position that even princes envied. And they knew clearly that all of this existed only thanks to the Sultan. Therefore, their loyalty to the Sultan was absolute, almost fanatical. When the Sultan ordered an attack, they attacked without asking why. When the Sultan ordered them to hold their position to the last man, they stood firm and died in place. This is exactly why European knights, people born in luxurious castles, nurtured with milk and honey, and honored as heroes from childhood, consistently lost to children kidnapped from poor villages. But theory is one thing. Actual combat is completely different. On August 29, 1526, on the plains of Mohacs in Hungary, 25,000 Hungarian troops commanded by King Louis II were preparing to face 50,000 Ottoman troops led by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. In terms of numbers, Hungary was losing, but they had what they believed was the decisive advantage: 10,000 heavily armored knights, considered the elite warriors of Europe. King Louis II, a 20-year-old who had never participated in a major battle, was confident that the thick steel armor of Hungarian knights would withstand any weapon, and when they charged into the Ottoman formation, nothing could stop them. He was catastrophically wrong. Suleiman placed 12,000 Janissaries at the center of the formation, behind wagons chained together, forming a solid barrier. In front of the wagons, hundreds of cannons and thousands of muskets had been loaded and were ready. This wasn't a formation for attacking, but a deadly trap. The battle began with Ottoman cavalry pretending to attack the Hungarian flanks, then pretending to panic and retreat. This was a classic Turkish tactic, a trap that had destroyed countless armies. But the Hungarian knights, drunk on illusions of glory, charged in pursuit without hesitation. As the Hungarian knights chased the fleeing Ottoman cavalry, they moved farther from their main formation. Horses grew tired and speed slowed. And then, when they turned to return, they realized they had been lured into the firing range of the Janissary formation. What happened next was a one-sided massacre. The Hungarian knights, still confident in their thick armor, charged toward the Janissary formation, intending to break through the wagon wall and eliminate the enemy infantry. They had seen battles like this hundreds of times, and every time their armor protected them from arrows and spears. But the Janissaries didn't use arrows or spears. When the distance narrowed to 50 meters, a thunderous roar erupted. Hundreds of cannons fired simultaneously, shooting iron balls and chains shot into the charging cavalry formation. Horses were torn apart, knights were thrown from saddles, and the formation began to fall into chaos. But that was just the first volley. When the surviving knights tried to continue charging, thousands of Janissary muskets began firing in layers. The first row knelt and fired. Lead bullets flew across the distance, struck the steel armor, and pierced it as if it were paper. While the first row reloaded, the second row stood and fired. Then the third row, a continuous wall of bullets, never stopping, with no gap for knights to charge through. The Hungarian knights, people who once considered themselves invincible, were now falling like puppets with cut strings. Their armor, which had once protected them from every medieval weapon, was now just a burden, making them sink to the ground faster when shot. Some tried to retreat, but the formation was too chaotic, and the horses too panicked to move in an organized manner. And then, when the Hungarian cavalry formation had completely disintegrated, Ottoman cavalry returned, surrounding them from both flanks, and began the slaughter. Within 2 hours, the Hungarian army had been completely annihilated. King Louis II died trying to flee. His horse stumbled, and he drowned in a small stream because his heavy armor dragged him down. Hungary lost its king, lost its army, and over the next few decades, lost its independence. But every empire has its decline, and the Janissaries were no exception. In the 17th century, as the Ottomans began losing strength, the Janissaries also began changing in dangerous ways. They were allowed to marry, and their sons were allowed to join the Janissaries without going through the devşirme selection process. This completely broke the original principle, a force without roots, without family, loyal only to the Sultan. Now Janissaries had families to protect, private interests to worry about, and most importantly, power to demand privileges. They began interfering in politics, deposing sultans they didn't like, and rebelling whenever their pay was cut or reforms were demanded. From an elite force protecting the empire, they became the greatest internal threat to the Ottomans. In 1826, Sultan Mahmud II decided it was time to end it. When the Janissaries rebelled against his military reform plans, Mahmud II didn't back down. He ordered cannons to fire directly into the Janissary barracks, burning them along with thousands of people inside. Survivors were hunted down and executed throughout Istanbul. In one day, the greatest military force that ever existed was erased. The Janissaries were one of the strangest paradoxes in history. They were slaves but had more power than free people. They were kidnapped but became the elite class. They lost their families but created a brotherhood more united than any clan. And for 200 years, they proved that origin doesn't matter as much as training, that discipline beats courage, and that a good system can turn anyone into a great warrior. But their story is also a warning. Too much power in anyone's hands ultimately leads to collapse. The Janissaries, who once saved the Ottomans from destruction, eventually became the threat that the Ottomans themselves had to destroy to survive. If you found this video interesting, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below to let me know what you think about the Janissaries. Do you think a force like this could exist in the modern world? Share your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.